Bum bum bum. Bum 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 bum. Bum bum bum. Hey everybody, come on in here. I'm coming to you from my phone instead of my iPad, so the sound will be a little bit different. So, I've been thinking about this story that now seems like it was a year ago, but do you remember, are you old enough to remember the summit with Putin? I think it was a week ago. It seems now so many news cycles ago. And, well, there are a few things I want to say about that. First of all, have you noticed that the Michael Cohen story has just pushed the summit stuff down to the minor news footnotes on the page of CNN? So sure enough, new news pushed the old news, down the chute a little bit. But I wanted to talk about the most puzzling part about the last week. And I have to admit it was puzzling to me too, but I want to propose a way to look at it that would make sense. And the thing I'm talking about is when President Trump was asked, did he think that Russians were meddling with our elections, I guess. And President Trump said, I don't know why they would. Now later he corrected it to, I meant to say, I don't know why they wouldn't, to make that compatible with what he'd said several times before, which we have on videotape. He said it in public a number of times that he does believe that they meddled. And so he was making his statement in public compatible with what he said before and what he said after, which is, yes, they meddled. So he said, I don't know why they wouldn't. But most people clearly heard would. And it's kind of puzzling. Why would you stand up there and say that? It doesn't even make sense as a lie, right? So it was just sort of weird. And so I propose a way to understand it. If you think of President Trump as someone who's talking about facts, then it doesn't make any sense at all. But he doesn't usually talk about facts. He's living in the persuasion realm. So he's persuading and he's selling all the time. And we see with Russia that he's brought the carrot and the stick. The carrot is that they can be friends and they can make a lot of money and we can, all be safer if they're our friend, which I don't think has ever been as clear before with prior administrations. With Trump, it seems true that we could get along. And then the stick, of course, is the sanctions and, the threat of getting worse if Putin doesn't be our friend, essentially. So if you look at it that way, that what Trump is trying to do is persuade, the reason he's being nice to Putin in public is that he's trying to persuade, etc. And somebody online was saying that it was embarrassing. And I thought to myself, there's a good example of someone who uses ego as a tool versus an obstacle. Trump was putting his own ego lower than Putin's for the purpose of persuasion. So he was using his own ego as a tool. Now, we don't believe that President Trump thinks he's, we don't think he has any confidence problems. So it's obvious that you saw him ramp down his ego for a specific strategic purpose to persuade. Now, when he said that I don't see why Trump would, think of that as a hypnotist. Imagine, if you will, and it's easy to imagine, that President Trump isn't a normal politician. He's a lot closer to what I've been calling a master persuader. Well, not close to it, he is. And when he stands next to you and he says, I don't see any reason you would, it just doesn't mean the same thing as when somebody else says it. Because I don't see why he would doesn't get to fact. It's not a fact. He's getting to reason, and he's getting to motivation. So he's basically framing the situation as Putin no longer has a reason. It wasn't intended to be factual. This is just one, hypothesis of how you could understand it. That it wasn't intended to be factual. It was intended to frame it and be persuasive. Because he just said, gigantic carrot if you're good, gigantic stick, you're in super trouble if you do anything like this again. And given that frame, I don't see why he would. And I thought about it. And everybody who's evaluating that has evaluated it as a statement of fact. That I don't see why he would, meaning Meddle in the election, is a statement that he doesn't believe he did. In other words, a statement about what the facts are. But if you look at the sentence, I don't see why he would, it's talking about Putin's motivations. I don't see why he would. What's the reason? He's not talking about whether it happened or didn't. He's talking specifically about Putin's motivation, which he had just changed. In other words, he just came from a meeting in which, in all likelihood, President Trump made a big impact on Putin's motivation, his reason for messing with us. Now, if you think that Putin messes with the United States and we don't mess back, or that it's not at least some kind of a tit for tat for tat for tit for tit for tat forever, if you don't think that's what's going on, it just looks like Putin is being a dick, and it's hard to imagine what he would get out of that. The only way Putin's motivations make sense, and I'm not a super spy, so maybe somebody else has a better sense of this, but the only way it makes sense to continually poke a superpower that can poke you back very, very hard is if the superpower is already poking. In which case, you've got to create enough pain in the other direction that you've got a little bit of, mutually assured destruction going on. So it's entirely possible that what President Trump did was remove Putin's reason. Now, how do you explain that to the press? You can't. President Trump can't go to the press and say, I talked to Putin, I removed his reason. Because that would be bad persuasion. If Putin saw that, he would say, what do you mean? Are you trying to, manipulate me? I mean, it's just the sort of thing you can't say if you're being effective. So if you look back on that event now, where if you imagine that the president just came out of a meeting where he had removed Putin's reason, and he was also, here's another key part of this, was also, in effect, these are my own words, giving Putin a virtual pardon for past deeds. Now, that's not to say any of those past deeds that he's accused of are okay. I'm not minimizing them. I'm just saying that for practical reasons, you may have to not focus on them in order to move forward. And so if the president removed Putin's reasons for messing with us in the future, and he thought he was giving him a virtual pardon at the same time, suddenly this sentence makes sense. I don't see why he would. Am I crazy? If you imagine that we're not talking about the facts, we're only talking about Putin's motivation, and the president believes he had just got done with a meeting in which he had changed Putin's motivation, whether he succeeded or not, we don't know, but he probably thought he did. Doesn't it sound entirely plausible that you would say, I don't know why he would? Now, imagine the press interprets that as you don't believe it's true, and then they challenge you on it. What would the president say to that? Would he say, under this theory, would he say, well, oh, hold on, I was just trying to persuade Putin, that wasn't for you. That wasn't for you guys. I was just trying to persuade Putin. You can't really say that, can you? So you're going to have to come up with some ridiculous story about why you framed it as you did, which was a frame that removes the reason for the war. Now, keep in mind that this is the same thing that Trump did with Kim Jong-un. President Trump removed Kim's reason for having nukes because he offered him a better deal. He made a credible offer, partly because he's Trump and not an ideologue. He's not connected to the military-industrial complex. That he could make a credible offer to Kim. Look, being our friend's a great deal. Being our enemy is terrible. So he just took the reason away. Kim doesn't have a reason anymore. He's got a lot of inertia, and it's not going to be easy to move to a denuclearization. It might take a while, but he doesn't have a reason to build up nukes and send them our way. And if you look at that same strategy, which was apparently successful, and you see that he's applying it in the Russia case, one way to understand it, and I don't know if that was true, by the way. Somebody says your voice makes me smell my grandma. I'm not sure I know what that means, but it's funny. So anyway, now that you've heard that potential explanation of events, does it sound feasible at all? Do a little, not fact-checking, but, give me the smell test on that. So I got a yes, a no, a yes, a thumbs up, feasible, yes, sure. All right, so I'm not going to say that that's actually what happened, but I am going to say that it makes perfect sense, given that it's the same play he did in North Korea, and that a master persuader would stand next to somebody and say something like, I don't know why he would, because that reframes the reason away. Let's talk about Michael Cohen. So apparently Michael Cohen taped his conversations with President Trump, and that there seems to be, as far as we know, at least one problematic tape talking about paying off the playmate. Now, if you were just narrating this like a movie, how interesting or coincidental, or I don't even know what to call it, is it that only just a few days ago, what was the top story? That President Trump was, humiliating. He was doing something humiliating. And already the story is that basically you can't hear that story without thinking about him getting busy with a Playboy Playmate. Playmate of the Year, I think. And it takes your head to such a completely different place. But where that place is, the people who are Trump supporters have already made peace with that. They knew what they were getting. There's a great scene from the old Sopranos show where Tony Soprano is having an argument with his wife, and Tony Soprano says, "You knew what you were getting." And I think when we elected Trump, I would have been a little bit disappointed, and I'm not even kidding. I'm not even kidding when I say this. I would have been a little bit disappointed if there had never been any Karen McDougal, Stormy Daniels kind of stories. Like, didn't you spend a little bit of time thinking, I know there's got to be better stories? I know somebody's got something better than, the mean thing he said once. There's got to be something there. So I would have been very disappointed if we didn't have a little something. So the people who were imagining that Michael Cohen was going to be the ruin of Trump, maybe they'll still have their day. But if I had to bet, minor irritation. So, it's entirely possible there might be something horrible on those tapes that will take the president out. But I'm going to say that, the likelihood is that it will sound, interesting enough to be headlines for a while, and it'll just be a minor irritation. So that's my prediction. Minor irritation, not no kind of a kill shot. Could be wrong though. Nobody knows. So you've got my prediction. All right. Anything else we need to talk about? One more thing. So I was watching CNN talking about the ridiculous offer that Putin made that, Mueller could go talk to their suspects if he could talk to some people in this country, including our diplomat. and of course, the Senate voted 98-0 to not let that happen. I don't know what power they have over that, but and of course the public was pretty much 100% against making that happen, and even the diplomat was like, "What the hell? Are you kidding me? Are you even considering this?" Now, here's one of those cases where I've argued that social media is running the country, because even if the Congress or even if the Senate had not voted 98-0 against it, even if the president hadn't already said no, that was never an option. We were never going to send anybody to Russia to be interviewed. So even if none of that happened, the public was pretty much, when you say the public was 100% against that, so it really couldn't have happened. So CNN is covering it as if it's something that could have happened. Like, can you imagine that this was on the table, etc.? But it's a little like saying, let's harness the energy from all the flying unicorns, and then having CNN argue about how much energy you can or cannot get from a flying unicorn, because there are no flying unicorns. So if somebody says we're going to harness the energy from a flying unicorn, it doesn't really make sense to argue about how much you're going to get, right? And it was the same thing with this Putin offer of you can talk to our guys, we'll talk to your guys. It was sort of a flying unicorn. You don't really need to treat that like it was ever possible. It never got into that general realm of maybe that might happen. That was never a possibility. All right, that's all I got for now. I got other things to do, and I'll talk to you later.